Wait, before we go out there. Zeke paused, looking at his son one last time before setting off on an endeavor that he was literally bred and born for. Generations of prophecy and planning leading to this moment, this event. I just wanted to say, frozen, collecting his thoughts, searching for the right words, holding out for divine inspiration. It's okay, father, his son, no longer a boy, on the precipice of becoming a man, interjected, seeing a rare moment of unbridled emotion on his father's face, hoping to prevent whatever he was about to expound upon. I know how proud of me you are. And yes, I know just what an honor it is to be God's chosen one, his dove. You truly are God's chosen one, ever amazed at how true that statement had become. Clear now, his son was as ready as he would ever be, and with that, Zeke opened the door. The entirety of the community was collected together in the small chamber, referred to as the foyer. It was an area rarely used this past 100 years, and never more than just a single sole spot checking the integrity of the airlock, ensuring that seal holds firm till this coming moment. Genesis chapter 8, 8-12. Zeke boomed, announcing to the entirety of their community that the century event had begun. All eyes entrenched on him. Noah sent out a dove initially. Finally, he sent the dove out again, and it did not return, signaling the earth was dry enough to support life. And with that, the small sealed exit into the airlock hissed into life, open. The entire community, taking a moment to get just a glimpse of the door on the other side. The thin piece of sheet metal separating them from whatever was left beyond it. Dove stepped into the airlock, the first door and all that he ever known, sealed shut behind him, frozen in time between two worlds, limbo. The outer door of the airlock as well had not been opened in 100 years, not since the stroke of midnight on December 31st, 1999, when it was sealed shut for a final time. Now on the dawn of the new century, Dove stood frozen, waiting for the mechanical lock to release, the outer seal hissing as the inner one had done before. With it, he felt the rush of fresh air hit his skin, the first air from outside the Ark to ever enter his or any of the other colonists' lung in their lifetimes. Air seems clean, he thought to himself as he moved towards the small, hidden exit just up ahead. It was midnight and dark. The air was crisp, cold but dry, noticeably less humid than inside the Ark. It was quiet, but there were indications of life. Chirps of an anonymous insect, the squawking of a lone bird. Nothing he recognized, but still some indication of life. He didn't see any lights or obvious signs of humanity, but that could have just been due to their intentionally remote location. He fished out his binoculars as he finished exiting the compound and cresting a large ridge overlooking the valley. Still no obvious signs of humanity in the valley below, shrouded in the pitch black just after the stroke of midnight. True and utter darkness hiding him under the thick canopy of trees. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face before clicking on the small torch he was given. There wasn't any path or clear sign of where to go, but that was by design. No reason for anyone to ever come up here. They had no desire to be found. He grabbed his small map and compass, took a moment to gather his bearings and headed out to see if, indeed, the waters had subsided. The air was much colder than he expected, or thought even possible. He had only known of cold from how others described it. Writers who typically were writing for an audience that had at least some experience with the frigid, but for Dove, someone that never knew anything below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, those words didn't do it justice. The way the crisp air seemed to burn his lungs and face. Everything stung, like needles piercing anything not shrouded under layer upon layer. In many places the cold even eluded the thick wool, burrowing, finding his unprepared skin. I had no idea the cold would burn worse than any fire, he thought to himself, letting go of his preconceived notions about the winter wind. All those hours reading countless pieces of both fiction and non-fiction, hoping to prepare himself for the outside world. What winter would feel like, were no match for the real thing. If he was wrong about something as simple as how cold air would feel, how could any of his other preconceived notions possibly hold up? The scout forced to leave them behind, with the rest of his youth inside the Ark. Humbled, he let his training overtake him. Glad I let Triss put so many layers on me before I left, he thought to himself. His uncle often chastised him as a child, studying, preparing, telling him not to assume anything, that he had no idea just what this world the Lord had created would throw at him. what it would be like outside the ark, repeatedly being told he was a child who knew nothing. No book, no word of man could adequately describe God's creations. The biting breeze relaying just how true that was. Feeling indignation at his elders with no more experience of the outside world than he. Now as that cold breeze slapped him in the face once more, jerking him back to reality, to this moment, he saw how little he truly knew. This acceptance of ignorance just cleared the way for all his training to kick in. "You've got to bounce to your step today," his teacher remarked as his young pupil entered the archive. "Today's the day we decide on the final path I will take with my maiden flight." The optimistic adolescent Dove chirped up, attempting to contain his excitement. Jubilation betrayed by the visible bounce in his step. "Correct?" Tris's injected, peeking her head from behind a towering stack of books. "Yes, but with a slight twist," her brother quickly seizing focus back from his younger sister. Just like Tris's to steal Proctor's thunder, claim his brilliant idea as her own. Not today. Not with something so large as this. "So what's the twist?" Dove nearly leaping out of his shoes with anticipation. "I want you to tell me, us," Tris again, interrupting so artfully too, reminded her brother.
"Yes?"
"Us, what you would do, what route you would undertake, and most importantly, why." Proctor putting heavy emphasis on the pronouns. "First, I'd exit the airlock, climb the ridge across the meadow outside the entrance, and then through the tree line." Dove started, clearly having gone through this countless times in his head. His mind racing so much that it spilled over into his feet, creating a nervous pace throughout the cramped space. Lost in thought, wanting to impress them both, Dove tucking around a stack of books before returning to the table with a big map. "Why's that?" Proctor cut in, reminding Dove of the importance of the whys. "There is a stream that carves through the forest, born from the runoff of melted snow atop our home." Dove started pointing to the features on the map he had just procured before trailing off into a daydream. His kinetic energy converted into imagination, picturing what that snow-topped peak above them actually looked like. He had seen thousands of photos in the archives, a litany of snow-capped peaks, but wondered what this specific peak looked like. How endlessly deep the snow. Beaming, looking to both his instructors for praise from a correct assumption. Safe assumption, but never assume anything. Noah corrected with authority, stamping his cane hard on the solid rock floor with each word. The taps echoing off the smooth tube interior of the room, punctuating his point. Yes, Uncle Dove's youth most evident when confronted with him, always the scared little bird in his presence. Only peeping up again after his uncle mimed, "Get on with your route. Having found the river, I could follow it. Knowing people need water and I should eventually come across some sign of civilization, either present or past. Some clue to point me in the next direction." The teen concluded confidently, again reminded that he was the one God chose for this. Dove had to have some of God's light, his strength inside of himself. Awoken from his stroll down memory lane, he once again checked both map and compass before continuing on with his journey. Quickly coming across the stream marked on the ancient map. It was larger than he expected. Tris had explained how it would only be a trickle since it is fed from melting snow atop the peak containing their community. This being the dead of winter, almost all the water should be locked up in snow, thousands of feet up the mountain's face. This was no trickle. He could feel the moisture in the air, being kicked up as the water tumbled downhill, bouncing over rocks. He took a moment to touch it, to grab a small, smooth stone from inside the stream. Millions of years of rushing water, smoothing off the sharp edges, polishing the stone. Seemed to sum all of this up to him. Tris will get a kick out of this little beauty, he told the darkness as he made room for the small rock in one of his countless pockets of his inner vest. If pressed, he would say he brought it back for scientific reasons, but in all reality, it's etched deep in our caveman brain to bring back a shiny rock for a potential mate. He stood frozen, hypnotized by the sound of the babbling brook. Swearing it was God's voice, listening for a message in its gurgles and pops. All his studying about the landscape he would encounter didn't prepare him for something like the soothing sound of rushing water. How many of his predecessors took that poetic chaos for granted, let it just be part of the background noise in their lives, never appreciating God's presence in their day-to-day, his voice, his beauty. Dove was starting to see just why a second flood was necessary. The once overstimulated teen had been following the stream all evening and into the following day, even though the thick canopy prevented him from actually seeing the sun. The ache in his muscles served for marking the passing of time and distance. He could feel the adrenaline and anticipation that fueled the last few hours of his trek starting to take its toll. Exhaustion hit him like a slap in the face, as if the mere thought of resting caused it. Now it was no longer his idea to call it a day, but a command from his spent body. He found a safe spot in a small clearing just off from the stream. He grabbed a handful of leaves to serve as a makeshift pillow, curled up tightly to conserve body heat, and fell asleep almost instantly. Dove woke to a symphony of birds, songs, and squawks, a mosaic of individuals, calling, communicating, but only their vocals, no actual birds in his sight. A rustle of leaf off in the distance, a harsh return to reality, breaking the hypnotic hold the birds' calls had on him. He turned abruptly, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was in the brush. It didn't sound large enough to be a real threat, but alone in the dark forest, anything could be a threat. He needed to remind himself of that. For the first time he could see why his uncle was so hard on him, always trying to keep him from making assumptions. Assuming it's not a threat in the underbrush, well, that very well could be his fatal mistake. A mistake that would not only jeopardize Dove's existence but also that of his comrades back at the Ark. If he was to fail, to perish, there was a very real chance it would be the end of all God's children. After taking a few extra moments to confirm there was nothing lurking in the brush, looking to have him as breakfast, he decided to indulge in a bite as well. He would need his strength if he was going to make the clearing while it was still daylight. He double-checked his map and finished his homemade energy bar that Triss made special just for this journey. With each bite, he could almost taste the caring and concern for him that Triss baked into it. A cursory glance at a map and seeing the terrain a bit better in the dim morning light splintering through the branches, Dove had a pretty good idea where he was, and confident he could make the clearing during daylight hours, possibly in as few as 6. A mix of the protein bar and his newfound optimism about the distance he has already traveled. Quickly repacked the map, compass, and torch in his satchel, refilled his canteen, and continued on his journey. The dim sunlight started to grow brighter as he progressed. Yes, the rising of the sun higher in the sky definitely helped, but it was more the slight thinning of the treetops that exposed him to more and more of the eerie glow. Before long he could actually see small patches of sunlight breaking through the trees. Raphael failed to capture the glory of that ray blazing from heavens above. He paused briefly to admire the ray of light, but knew just how close he was, and vastly stepped up his pace. Almost running as if he no longer controlled his legs, but God was pulling him toward his light. And then it hit him, almost stopping him dead in his tracks. Sunlight hitting his skin, flush on his face. It's not like he grew up in darkness. Both the arboretum and the fields were bathed in the exact same UV rays. 24 hours a day back in the Ark. The artificial sunlight used to grow the trees, producing the air they breathed and the food they all needed to survive. But this was different. That light was man-made, the product of artificially stimulating the electrons in a noble gas. This was the light of God. This was born in the heart of a star, their sun, the only light that could truly be called sunlight. This was a light born of the most violent collisions in all the universe. Enough force to fuse to atoms to make a new one. This was light that took millions of years to find its way out of the sun's core before making the 8-minute journey to his face. It might be the exact same wavelength of what illuminated all he saw his entire life, but clearly it wasn't the same. This was primal, born from an explosion only God could create, and that made all the difference. He let the sunlight wash over him, bathing his starving skin, before approaching the ridge. Below him, the stream dropped about 3 meters to the pool below. If you were making a tourist ad, this would be the money shot. Although he had never actually been here, Dove knew this spot well. He studied it all his life. This was most likely the only spot on Earth that he had actually seen and read about before coming upon it. National Geographic did a nice piece on it in one of their countless magazines contained in the archive. Dove spent almost all his free time in the National Geographic section of the archive. He couldn't get enough of them. He loved them all. The photos, the articles, the tales of both man and nature intertwined, but seeing your home enshrined. Well, of course that issue was his favorite. Triss would always try to get him to round out his knowledge base, giving him fiction from the Bronte sisters or think pieces from George Orwell, but he would always end up with that March Nat Geo edition, staring at the foliage and fauna just outside their walls. It was indeed the first actual life he had seen yet. He could hear life from the moment he exited the Ark, but this was his first actual glimpse. He made sure to get a quick photo, needing some physical evidence of life, just in case he scared her away while making his descent down the cliff face. The doe lifted her head once or twice when Dove would dislodge a stray rock during his descent, but each time she would continue drinking after a short pause, confirming that she didn't see Dove as a threat. He was able to get quite close, maybe 3 meters before the doe turned and faced him. From his years studying, he could see she was a doe, most likely around 3 years old, but something was odd. Thanks to the glossy photos and expert camera work, he had a very real image of what the indigenous deer of this area looked like. From a distance, that doe looked just like the ones from the century-old photos, but now up close, he could see something was off. Her eyes were noticeably bigger, while her snout was shorter, almost snubbed. She looked like a Disney version of the local population, or that was the best way he could describe it. He took another, more detailed photo so he could show both Triss and Proctor when he returned to the archive. As much as he was reveling in the splendor of this picturesque cove, he reminded himself of the task at hand. Checking his watch, a few hours of daylight left. As the trees receded and more open air exposed, he could clearly and now correctly identify the sound as traffic. He didn't need the map to know what was just ahead of him, and it sounded alive. Cresting the hill and at the exit of the dense forest, stood a large road, dotted with handfuls of traffic flowing in both directions. The freeway was a landmark that Proctor knew would be Dove's best chance to determine if the waters had receded. Once he distinguished that it wasn't flowing water but instead flowing traffic, he was overcome with an urge to finally see for himself. The cars glistened in the early day sunlight. The style sleeker, much more rounded, almost egg-shaped, more than any of the models he had seen photos of. Some had completely blacked out windows, while others were nearly transparent, exposing its passengers for all to see. That was his undeniable proof. He made sure to get a few photos, showing the tide was still too high to venture forward. Nothing left to do but head back and trigger the Omega protocol.
Thank you for joining us. We are still in search of 2 or 3 people to be our heralds. But until then, my sister and I will be handling the duties. So please, if you like the work and feel you can do a better job—
And we are sure you can.
Yes, head to the Substack and submit your entry. But until then, we will accept the task.
Maybe we should start with explaining what the Herald's duties entail. Our community has been sealed up, separated from your world for a century, and we fear Ezra's accounts may need additional information to truly encapsulate his vision.
Not to mention that he, technically, isn't an archivist, although he does show great promise.
Leave it to the man born into the role to feel compelled to make that distinction.
Can you put your petty jealousy aside for a moment and, I don't know, possibly start by recapping what was sent in Ezra's first transmission, the whos and whens that might have been lost with Ezra's limited knowledge of the world that our listeners are living in?
Sorry, you're right. We start with our titular character, Defend his father Zeke, sharing a tender moment before the start of the century event and his maiden voyage.
And to clarify, Birk sealed himself and his 7 followers inside the Ark just before midnight on December 31st, 1999. The Ark was to remain sealed for 100 years, only to be opened at the Century event just before the stroke of midnight on December 31st, 2099, where they find themselves now.
Yes, thank you, brother, and on behalf of the entire community for your ever-present clarifications.
I'll stop clarifying when it stops being necessary.
As I was saying, we joined both the Son of Birk and the direct Son of Birk just before Zeke's address.
And what is the difference between a Son of Birk and a direct Son of Birk?
Wow, I was mid-sentence. Maybe let me finish my thought before interrupting next time. To answer my brother's questions, a direct Son of Birk is a firstborn son, whereas Son of Birk is just one of his male descendants born of a Son of Birk. Much like my brother here is a direct son of Evan, the original archivist, whereas I am merely just a child of Evan. May I continue? Or is there something more you need to add?
No, you're doing a great job. Please continue.
Zeke starts the century event with a passage from Genesis about Noah releasing the dove to check if the flood has ended. Much like how our dove was about to leave the ark out the airlock to see if our incarnation of the flood too has receded. He gets his first taste of the outside world, adjusts to the cold before heading out on his designed route. This leads him to a flashback of him putting the final touches on that plan.
And this is also where you and I make our first appearance.
Just like you, Proctor, to somehow make this about you.
I included you as well, Triss.
Yeah, as a footnote.
What was that?
I was saying this is where we also Meet Dove's uncle, Zeke's brother, and Derek, son of Birk, Noah. Noah is Zeke's older brother and our shepherd, tasked by God to lead us out of the ark and return his light to the post-flood world. After the flashback, we return to Dove deep in the forest as he makes his way to the clearing, where Dove comes across his first sign of actual life. The first sign that possibly the waters have subsided and God has returned the flora and fauna. Dove's hope and optimism that it is truly all clear is short-lived as he sees that there are still, in fact, plenty of people left when he comes across the highway, confirming the original scripture that another week would be needed before sending Dove out again.
Thank you, Triss. I couldn't have said it better myself. Anything more you would like to add?
Please send your submissions to apply as Herald. I already am forced to spend way too much time with my brother as it is. Please don't make me spend more doing these every week.
You know you love it. What would you ever do without me?